sistem pilihan raya boleh direformasikan di Malaysia. Tapi kita tahu kita berhadapan dengan satu institusi yang tidak bebas, tidak adil dan seolah-olah tidak mahu membawa penambahbaikan. Baik, saya tidak akan cakap panjang. Saya dengan ini, malam ini kita ada menampilkan 3 orang panelis yang saya rasa cukup hebat. Kita ada anak muda, kita ada wanita, kalau tidak kumpulan wanita akan marah. Dan kita ada seorang orang akademik yang cukup dikenali ya. Saya tahu kumpulan wanita dah, bos saya pun seorang daripada kumpulan wanita dah pandang dah. Baik, dengan segala hormatnya saya menjemput ataupun saya akan menyerahkan program malam ini kepada saudari Fadiah yang juga merupakan yang akan jadi moderator pada malam ini dan juga merupakan seorang ahli jawatan kuasa pemandu Bersih 20. Dengan segala hormatnya saya mempersilakan. Dan juga selamat datang kepada para special branch.
Terima kasih Mandip. I would like to invite all panelists to come on stage. A very good evening to everyone. Thank you for being here with us to listen to our distinguished panelists on this topic, electoral reforms before GE14. I think it's very important for us to talk about this now because elections are looming and we're just waiting for it to be announced. And I think it's quite important for us to talk about reforms and what we can do to actually push for it before the elections. And with us, we have 3 distinguished panelists. The first panelist on my right is Dr. Jomo. Dr. Jomo writes on economic development challenges, and he was an economics professor until 2004 and Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development in the United Nations System from 2005 to 2015. He received the Wesley Leontief Prize for advancing the frontiers of economic thought in 2007. And in the middle, we have our lawyer, always acting for Bersih. Thank you so much for that. Shahrizan Johan is a practicing lawyer. His areas of practice include general litigation, criminal and public interest litigation relating to human rights and the Constitution. Shahrizan was an elected member of the Bar Council and served from 2012 to 2017. He chaired the Bar Council National Young Lawyers Committee for 3 terms. And the last panelist is Maria Chin Abdullah, and she's the chairperson of Bersih 2.0, the Coalition for Free and Fair Elections. She's one of the founders of Persatuan Kesedaran Komunitis Selangor Empower, an NGO focusing on building women's leadership and community capacity for youth and grassroots women leaders. Thank you to all our panelists for agreeing to be here to share your thoughts and insight on the topic. I would like to start with our first panelist, Dr. Jomo. My question to you is, we know that corruption in Malaysia is structural and it has undermined public institutions, respect for human rights and human dignity and economic development. How dire is the situation? I mean, what can we do to change it? I mean, I think this question has been asked, I think, many times. And a lot of people are still skeptical and as to what they can do to change things. Maybe you can respond to that.
First, let me thank Bersih for having me here this evening, and thank you all for your interest in this discussion. It's very good to see old friends and make new friends tonight. I think the basic problem which we have in Malaysia today is that, in a sense, corruption has become not only institutionalized, but is seen as largely acceptable. It is seen as necessary for business, it is seen as necessary for politics. And this is the biggest problem which we have. Once people see corruption as normal, as acceptable, then the question of abuses becomes very easy to it becomes easier. It's a bit like the GST. When the GST or value-added tax is first introduced, usually it starts off at a very low rate, something like 3% and so on. Then it goes up, and you find in the United Kingdom, it has gone up to about 17%. In Italy, it is 21% and so on. But it starts small. They basically get you to accept the principle. Now, the reason I mentioned the value-added tax is because it represents a very fundamental shift in Malaysian taxation. The burden of income taxation has gone down tremendously, and you have a very, very major shift to GST, which is value-added taxation, which basically hits everybody as consumers. So it effectively raises the cost of living. And in the case of Malaysia, because of the rate at which it's been introduced, it basically significantly increases government revenue, whether government revenue which can be abused in various different ways, and so on and so forth. Now, as far as corruption is concerned, I think we all know that there has been an ongoing campaign in recent months to tackle corruption. And I think one should take it quite seriously, because I think it is affecting some types of corruption. But the elephant in the room is not being affected. The most serious elements, examples of abuse are not being affected. I don't need to tell you all know much better what is happening with 1MDB. But unfortunately, the focus on 1MDB has distracted attention from a great number of other forms of abuse, of bribery, of corruption which are taking place. Let me give you a simple example which almost no politician talks about these days, and that is what is happening with Felda. Felda settlers were encouraged to buy shares in this thing called FGV, Felda Global Ventures, and they paid for it, and now the value of those shares is less than half, slightly over a third of what they paid for it. Now they've been taken for a ride, okay? And of course, there are a lot of issues, given the elections are imminent, they are reassured and they won't lose the money, etc., etc. But clearly, this is one example of abuse. Whether you call it corruption or not is something which is quite, we can get into those details later if you're interested. Similarly, there are a number of other things where the public has basically entrusted a great deal of authority to the government. The government has basically done all kinds of things. Let me give you another example. Ordinary Muslims in this country, pious, want to go on the Hajj at some point in their lives. They slowly save money with Tabung Haji. And what does Tabung Haji do with its money? It invests in all kinds of things, including real estate schemes abroad. Now, earlier this week, I read a very major report on why there has been a major shift towards so-called mega projects all over the world. And part of the reason is because of the payoffs which are available. The payoffs which are available particularly to politicians. So there's a preference for mega projects, not only because there are huge amounts of money involved in mega projects, and so getting say 10% of a multi-billion-dollar project is a great deal of money, of course. But that's why you have an abuse of. Now, let me give you a simple example, which I think raises rather fundamental questions. Once upon a time, when there was foreign investment in this country, it was argued that Malaysians didn't have capital. Now this, of course, was a lie, because there was capital, but it was basically the land and access to the land which was controlled by the British, and it was given basically to British companies. Now, after independence, what we saw was investments in this area, Section 13, in the Bangsa area, for example, where industries, small industries were established. And so you had foreign investment because supposedly Malaysians didn't have that technology. But if you think about the most significant technological developments which have taken place in Malaysia, most of those developments have actually been done by Malaysian engineers, for example. One of Maria Chin's former colleagues, Dr. Jaya Gopal, for example, has done a study where he shows how, he's an engineer, he shows the engineering developments involved in refining palm oil were basically all Malaysian. There was no foreign there was no foreign technology, no foreign investment. It was a bit of learning by trial and error. But today, what do you find with foreign direct investment? Foreign direct investment is coming into real property, into landed property. And this fundamentally changes the game. You know, so it certainly boosts the prices. So the people who previously owned the land or who continue to own the land appreciate it. But the rest of us have to contend with much higher prices. So where the line where you say something is corrupt, you know, is very, very difficult to draw because it might be legally perfectly acceptable. But that's why increasingly the former president of South Africa, for example, Thabo Mbeki, he published a report 3 years ago where he talks about illicit financial flows. Illicit does not necessarily mean it's illegal, but obviously it's beyond the pale of acceptability, public acceptability. So I think we really need to think about how the system itself is essentially very corrupt. And I would just like to finally conclude by referring you to a magazine which was issue which came out last week, and it talks about a system which is corrupt, where the people who seek rent and gain rents, they basically claim those very rents which they take from other people as their own property. So is the appropriation of such property rights a form of corruption? So basically, and sorry, I didn't mention, the source of that quote, which sounds very radical, is actually the Economist magazine, which is a very conservative magazine. So you can, so I think what we need to understand is that the entire system itself is corrupt now. And what is legal is not necessarily, what is legal doesn't necessarily mean that it is not corrupt and unacceptable for the public, for all of us. Let me stop here. I think I've gone on for too long. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jomo. I think it's quite important to remind ourselves that the fact that we have to pay attention to how the entire system itself is extremely corrupt. And also, just because something is legal, it doesn't mean that it's morally acceptable. Just because something is legal, it doesn't mean that it's something that we have to accept. We have to continue to challenge the system and also uncover all the corrupt practices that have become a culture. And I think it's quite sad that corruption in Malaysia is not only institutionalized, that it has become acceptable. I think we have come to a stage where we just accept what happens, and maybe at some point we just become indifferent, and that's going to be very difficult to change. Thank you, Dr. Jomo, for your insights. I would like to address the next question to our lawyer, Sharizan. And Sharizan, you have dealt with a number of cases on behalf of Bersih. You have generously dedicated your time to helping us challenge some of the unconstitutional, some of the arbitrary provisions of the law with regard to our electoral system. Maybe you could share with us, your experience, your insights, your thoughts on how the judiciary works in dealing with all these cases. I mean, I'm sure it's an uphill battle, So maybe, it would be great if you could share with us, the kind of reality we are facing right now with regard to all these cases that we filed in court.
Okay, thank you, Fadia. Can everyone hear me at the back? Yeah? Okay. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me here to Bersih. It's really, when you want to talk about elections, I think, I don't know, I feel that there's a lot of apathy out there, I think. People seem to think that, unlike perhaps the last GE, this GE is not, as watermark as we would like for it to be. So there's a lot of apathy, and even I think the political parties are now giving up. They are more interested in fighting each other, I think. But anyway, we must soldier on. So when you talk about, I think in terms of the law, I think the recent exercise when it comes to delineation, I think is a perfect example of, it's not so much the problem with the judiciary, actually. I mean, you can talk about that. But I think the problem itself is with how the law is drafted and how the law actually does not give leeway for people to actually even challenge these cases. The delineation exercise, for example, now we have a Court of Appeal decision which says that essentially that, before the EC actually tables the proposals, or rather the Prime Minister tables a proposal of the delineation in Parliament, any attempts to actually review the proposals would be premature, essentially. So this is slowly the line that has been taken, and it doesn't come out from a vacuum. There is actually provisions there which they can rely on. So, and also if you look at, for example, the problems with electoral roll, Bersih always talks about, how the electoral roll needs to be audited. There's problems there's issues with it. There are people who live in the same area or the same address where there's 20, 30 people sometimes. Or people who are already passed away still on the electoral rolls and so on and so forth. We've heard this time and time again, and challenges have been made in court. Judicial reviews have been filed in court. But what happens? They fail. Why? Because under the Elections Act, Section 9A provides that when the electoral roll is certified, it is deemed to be final and no one can challenge it, not even in court. This is what was decided, for example, just the case of, I think, the Klang MP, Charles Santiago, actually took an action in court to challenge the electoral roll. And his, I think, leave was not even granted. And the reason for that was because Section 9A provides that you cannot challenge it in court. So this is the problem. You have laws like this, laws like this which actually oust the jurisdiction of the courts, and you can't even challenge it. So now we have an issue with the electoral roll, okay? EC is not doing anything about it, okay? They feel that they're not even acknowledging that there is a problem, right? So what can people do? People think that, okay, let's bring this to court. But when they bring it to court, you've got Section 9A. You got the provisions of the 13th schedule, for example, when you talk about delineation, And when these cases come to court, because of the fact that the law is drafted in such a manner, they fail. So I think we really need to look at this, and I think Bersih has been pushing for this. So for example, Section 9A, I think if, say, for example, it's too late for the EC to conduct an audit of the electoral roll, okay? If it's too late, if they say that it's too late because, it requires a nationwide thing, I think Bersih would disagree if they do say that it's too late. But if they say it's too late, then the next best thing is to allow people to actually bring this to court, to challenge it. So that when there are cases, when there is evidence of all these irregularities, discrepancies, and so on and so forth, they are able to actually bring it to court. So, Section 9A, for example, should be amended. But there is a silver lining recently. I'm not sure whether people are aware, but the lawyers have actually hailed this recent landmark judgment by the federal court in the case of Semenyih Jaya. The case of Semenyih Jaya basically is a case where the federal court said that the judicial power of the federation lies with the judiciary. This is despite the fact that Article 121(1) has been amended in 1988 to say that the judicial power of the federation, or rather the High Court has jurisdiction only insofar as what federal law provides. So what this means is that if, say for example, federal law, if there is an act of parliament which says that the courts cannot challenge this particular provision, then the courts are helpless, meaning the jurisdiction of the court would be ousted. And for the longest time, the courts have actually agreed to say that whenever there is this ouster clauses, they will say that we cannot look into this, just like Section 9A, we cannot look into this because Parliament has said that we can't look into it. But now with the Semenyih Jaya case, it may mean that these sort of ouster clauses can now be challenged, despite the fact that there is a provision there to say that the jurisdiction of the court cannot be questioned. If you take the Semenyih Jaya case, it may mean that now courts are willing to look at it, despite the fact that there is an ouster clause. So at the very least, in that sense, there is, when it comes to this sort of ouster clauses, which would affect some cases when it comes to the voting system and elections and so on and so forth, it may mean that we can perhaps relook at this kind of provisions like Section 9A and to see whether we can actually now mount a fresh challenge. So I think that's it for now. In conclusion, I suppose for this particular one, I mean, there's one thing, the issues with the judiciary is there, but also at the same time, I think the law itself is crafted in such a way that it's not helpful to us.
Thank you, Shah, for your insights. I think it's quite important to note the fact that there are many challenges that we face, when we file cases in court, and one of the challenges is the existence of oppressive provisions of the law that prevent people from basically asserting their rights as a voter. But I think we still move to challenge this in court because we feel like there's a space that we can always advocate for change, for amendments to all these oppressive laws, and why not give it a try? It's part of advocacy work that we have to do to inform the public of their rights and also what is the right thing to do. Thank you, Shah, for your insights. So Maria, Berkeley has come up with this new campaign called Electoral Reforms Before GE14, or we're talking about reforms, right? So I think it's something that we've been talking about for quite some time, since the establishment of the coalition, I think back in 2006. To some people, the word reforms feels boring. They feel like, oh God, we've been talking about this for so long, nothing has changed. Can we still, go through the system and use the system to challenge the system? And some people start losing faith in it, and some people are also talking about not voting to just register their protest with regard to the existing system. I mean, what do you think about all these responses from people when we talk about reforms?
Thank you very much. I guess that the reason why we actually have this campaign, and we call it the Electoral Reform Campaign, is simply because we are very worried about the coming elections, where our worry is really the results are being predetermined even before we even go to the ballot box. And why we say that is simply because, one, the electoral roll, which Shah has actually highlighted. We can't challenge the electoral roll, means that in this coming election, we will have a very flawed electoral roll that contains people who are still dead. They have not actually, Election Commission has not cleaned up the electoral roll. So you have people who have passed on and still on the electoral roll. When we started with our hotline, We receive calls almost on a daily basis. People are complaining. They have been registered without their knowledge. They have been transferred from, and seriously, from Kuala Lumpur to something like in Johor. Yeah, and they have never even stayed in Johor before. And it's not one case, it's a few cases that have actually come forward to show us. And when we check on the electoral roll, we find these discrepancies. And it's actually quite a border for the voters to actually change their voting status, because they have to go all the way, if you are in Selangor, go all the way either to Shah Alam or to Johor to inform the SPR office to say that, you know, it's wrongly entered. Wait for a period of objection for, because you have to prove that, you know, you are a genuine voter. And then only you get back onto the electoral roll. And what we are also facing now is that when we actually went on a campaign to ask people to register, we found out that there are so many objections. Particularly targeted is actually Selangor State, where one day, I remember Ali Wong was saying that, you know, in one day, 500 new voters were actually taken out and objected, even though they were actually genuine voters. And once you are taken out of the electoral roll, you go through another whole process of re-registering yourself. And that actually defeats the whole purpose of EC's campaign to say that, you know, register and vote on the one hand, and then on the other hand, you allow for baseless objections to actually happen. You're taking out people, and particularly you're allowing the objections to come through, knowing that, you know, most of these are actually genuine voters. And the ridiculous thing is that now in the SPR office in Shah Alam, we have UMNO representative given a table to give out the 100 ringgit so to people who are genuine voters and have been objected to. So you go there, you have been objected, and when you can prove that you are actually a genuine voter, you get paid 100. That's the penalty, yeah, from the objector. So the objector is actually majority is UMNO, coming from the UMNO branch in Selangor, and they have a table there to pay you. The other thing is, what worries us is that the postal voting. The postal voting in the last election actually influenced 30 seats, which could have actually changed the election results. But because postal votes are actually introduced in the last minute, when you are doing your counting, it is very difficult to verify where these postal votes come from and who are these people. So one of the proposals that is from Bersih is really to get rid of postal voting in Malaysia. But to introduce this advanced voting, which we had in GE13, advanced voting is that, you know, people who are unable to actually turn up on polling day to vote, we are saying that, you know, make them as advanced voters. It could be your soldiers, your police that you have actually stationed far away in the jungle or whatever, or the marine. Allow them to vote as advanced voters a day before the polling. Why a day is because in G13, advanced voters vote 5 days before the polling day. And so the ballot boxes were actually kept, and we found that, you know, there were a lot of movement of the ballot boxes without telling the candidates. So we actually want to stop the movement of the ballot boxes and say that, you know, you vote on that day and you count on the same day for advanced voters. So that actually cuts out the fraud, the moving of the boxes, and any kind of dubious activities that, or speculations about what happens to advanced voting. So, and the results will be announced on the same day as when you count the advanced voting. And we are actually trying to introduce this simply because we want the process to be accountable and also to be as transparent as possible. The other issue that we have is, of course, the delineation. The delineation this time round will actually change the results of GE14 if it's allowed to carry on. Say, take my constituency, for example, PJ Utara, Tony Pua's place. We already have about 100,000 voters there. The nearby constituency is Sivarasa's place, that is Subang. He has also about 100,000, 120,000. But the new delineation actually shifted 50,000 voters from Siva's constituency. That means the whole of Bukit Lanjang, that's your Bandar Utama, right up to the curve. That whole place has been shifted now into Tony Pua's place, making his constituency more than 100,000. You're dealing with 150,000 voters serviced by one member of parliament. Yeah? And Siva's place has been reduced to about 80,000, which only covers Payajaras and Kota Damansara. So these two areas are actually very hotly contested, and these are the two UMNO areas. So in a way, you pack the PJ Utara as many voters, and you still get one MP, and then you still gain back the Subang under Barisan Nasional. So that is how they have been shifting, and we have a case in Malacca that we have actually taken up, which is Bukit Katil. We have actually challenged it in court. It is now being discussed in court, and we have actually managed to have one small winning. That means we actually asked for a stay of the delineation in Bukit Katil, and we actually was agreed and decided by the judge to say that, you know, there's a stay until other cases comes through. So, but the thing is that, you know, if the Election Commission has been doing their work and not been meddling with the electoral roll and doing the delineation in accordance to the Constitution, then we don't have to challenge them in court and waste our time and waste a lot of money to actually file in the cases and pay for the filing fees and a lot of time and effort spent on preparing the cases. But unfortunately, we have an election commission that actually doesn't really care. Yeah, even though we ask for meetings, we submit evidences of some of these discrepancies, it has actually gone down deaf ears. But of course, the Bersih will continue with our campaign and ask for the reforms. But besides the Election Commission, we are also looking at the other institutions who actually do have some influence over the issues that comes out from election, like, for example, corruption. There's a lot of evidences that we have collected, and we have actually published it in our People's Tribunal book to show the kind of vote buying that goes on during the campaign period. And that actually, when we present it to the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission, they say, no, this is not our area. This is actually the responsibility of the Election Commission. And when we ask the Election Commission, they say, no, it's not under our jurisdiction. So we are actually going back and forth between the Election Commission and MACC. And so therefore, we are in Bersih, if you notice in Bersih 4 and 5, we have actually changed our demand to expand to say that other institutions that have some relationship with the kind of issues that are coming out during elections have to also take the responsibility. The MACC has to take the responsibility. So has the police be responsible during the election period particularly in terms of the freedom of expression, in terms of even helping us to monitor the kind of vote buying that goes on. So we are actually trying to say that, beyond the electoral reform, we also want other institutions besides the Election Commission to take responsibility, because this is a very important election. It's a national election where we actually cast our vote to determine who governs this country. So the institution has to step up and take the responsibility to help us monitor this election. But say by ourselves through our election observation is totally not enough. So that's why we are also asking the Election Commission that allow us to have a status, an official status as election observers to be inside the polling station. But of course that has been rejected. I don't think we will ever get any approval from the Election Commission. But what we are hoping is that if every voter were to actually help us in terms of the election observation, report to us during the election campaign, it will actually help to reduce some of this fraud that's happening. And definitely election observation requires quite a lot of our resources, not just human resources, but actually financial resources. So we are pulled in many ways, putting up court cases, running observations, running campaigns, and also going down to the streets when we actually find that, we are coming up against a wall. These are all the activities that Bersih does, and we are hoping that, this coming election, I know there is that tiredness, frustration, but we still need to cast our vote, because that is part of our responsibility, and it's also part of our duty to actually say that, this is the small change that I can actually bring as a voter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. So do not ever let your frustration stop you from doing what you are supposed to do, what we have to do to save this country. So I think it's quite important to note that, there's blatant interference by the ruling party, as we can see, with the objections to new voters, for example. It's quite systematic in how they're doing it. They're actually paying people to do, to basically object to people without any basis. And it's also, I think, we have to keep reminding the institution that's responsible for this to carry out their duties according to the law, and ensure that we have a just electoral system. I think the EC has to be, taken to task to do this. Now, I would like to open the floor to questions. I'm sure you have a lot of burning questions you want to ask the panelists. Could you please introduce yourself? And also, if you are from an organization, maybe you can introduce your organization also. The floor is yours. Questions? Yes.
The name is Mohan. I don't belong to any organization. We are independent individuals here, even though we come as a family. They've got every right to do what they want to do with their franchise. I'll start with Madam Maria. If we are so blatant, the government, the governance, the processes, why don't we fight fire with fire? Can we go and set up a table at the Election Commission office and hand out $100 after we have made objections to voters in where we believe that the Barisan National are doing exactly what they're doing to us? And let us quote the consequences of action, because as equally as we quote those consequences, the opposing people who have been sanctified, who have been condoned, sitting there with a table, amazingly unbelievable. Let's go and do that. Give me a table, I'll go and sit there. Give me the $100 for about 500 people, and maybe I'll raise some, and we'll do that. How else can you do it? I mean, you're making objections, your objections not being attended to, you made to feel very stupid about things, then behave stupidly. No, you don't think that's the right approach.
Maria, would you like to respond to that question? Or maybe we, yeah, if. Okay. So it's a comment by a. Yeah, maybe any response to that comment?
Maria, I think we can talk to the opposing parties, PKR, PAS, or whatever, and tell them, let's go and get all this done and sit down and do something like what the UMNO is doing or Barisan is doing. Then maybe there'll be a wake-up call, there'll be a hoo-ha, a fracas, and then at least everyone comes to know rather than coming to see Maria Chin here and hearing it from her. Otherwise, they'll never get to hear all of this through our print media, and our internet media is so much of fake news. We don't know what's real and what's fake.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, this general question and comment. I think Professor Joe, you mentioned about the FELDA, the FGV, and all this. I'm just wondering all these issues about election. By the way, my name is Fogg. I'm just a concerned citizen. Does it really resonate with the rural folks? Because electoral reform is a big topic. Okay, it appeals to urban voters like us here in this place. I know the turnout here is also quite small, so I don't know how forums like this can have an impact. On urban voters maybe, but the rural folks, do they really care? Yeah.
The country has changed a lot. Technically, 90% of the country, 91% of the population lives in urban or semi-urban areas. Okay, even a Felda settlement, for example, is not really all that rural anymore, and this is part of the reason why PAS particularly has been able to make some inroads in Felda areas and also in other areas. So I think I was away from the country for about more than 11 years, almost 12 years. And one thing I realized when I came back is that there have never been so many people, especially Malays, who are not only disgusted but embarrassed by the level of abuse and corruption which is going on. You don't really, just because people don't say anything about it doesn't mean that they tolerate it. It's just that they're embarrassed. But for many people, they have to look at the larger scheme of things, okay? And this is why I made those comments about corruption and the growing acceptability of corruption and why this is a big problem. Okay? And so it's not as if people in the countryside do not care. But you look, for example, prices of palm oil are not particularly high. People are affected by that. There's hardly any rubber grown in this country. The last 2 years, there was El Nino, and that affected water supply. It affected planting seasons. So rice farmers were adversely affected. So I don't think one should assume that the rural people don't care, Now, there are two things which I think the government has done which are reasonably popular. One is the introduction of the minimum wage. But when you really think about it, the minimum wage was introduced after years and years and years of struggle by unions, by NGOs, by opposition parties and others. Okay? It wasn't as if it came, as a great gift. So one has to recognize that these things are concrete achievements of popular struggles. The other thing which is popular is BRIM. Okay? Now, why is BRIM popular? When you look at the government figures, actually the government is providing less in terms of subsidies. Okay? If you look very carefully, the subsidies for sugar, for rice, for cooking oil, other subsidies have largely been cut or are being cut. Okay? So all those subsidies have gone. But when you give BRIM, it is a direct subsidy. The recipient appreciates a direct subsidy. Even though at the end of the day, they might be paying much, much more for so many things because of GST and so on. But the fact that they receive it personally, it goes through their pocket, it goes through their bank account, means that people feel some benefit. That's why, you know, when people were criticizing the BRIM and all that, I said it's ridiculous. That is precisely what people have been calling for decades. You know, when Tunku Razali was contesting in 1990, for example, he called for a subsidy for everybody over, for an allowance for everybody over 60. Okay? Now, you go and you look at what is being said about aging in the world today. This is now a very commonplace demand all over the world. So I don't think we should. So while I appreciate those two things, yeah, the one, the minimum wage, and two, the BRIM, I think we have to put all this in perspective and recognize that these are concrete achievements, not because they are great gifts from somebody on high, but because these are things which people have been asking for many, many years, and now they're finally been realized. Okay? But if you look at the numbers very carefully, you will actually find that the government is collecting more in taxes and giving less to the public, even though it might be reaching poorer people. After all, who buys petrol? Okay, if you've got a Mercedes 300, you're probably using much more petrol than somebody who was using a Myvi, right? So so I think these are things which are not easy to explain to people, but I think it is important to realize that to take the view that everything government does is bad, would be a mistake. One has to begin to realize that there are things which governments have done which are actually which are important. Let me give you another example. Malaysia spends a lot of money on education. Okay, but the outcomes are very, very modest. Okay, we don't do well on all international education indicators. Malaysia spends much less on health, but until the 1980s, Malaysia was among the top 3 in Asia. And the main reason was because of very, very important, modest but important reforms. For example, during the 1960s, the first Malaysian Director General of Medical Services, a man by the name of Muhammad Said, okay, he introduced the idea of a bidan kampung. Okay? So you had midwives being trained to live in the communities themselves, and these midwives basically reduced the incidence of maternal mortality and infant mortality as a consequence. So these are things which were real achievements, but by the 1980s, with all the switch to privatization and all this kind of thing, what we find is that all those things basically didn't matter anymore. There are still many things which can be done, and in terms of health, we are not all that bad, but there's much, much more which can be done also. We shouldn't take great pride in the fact that, for example, Malaysia has the highest level of overweight and obesity in Asia. We have the highest incidence of diabetes in Asia, particularly type 2 diabetes, and a whole range of what are now politely called non-communicable diseases. These are preventable if you took much more you had a much more serious commitment to public health. But public health generally doesn't make money. So there's very little interest in it. So we have to get our priorities right, and you need basically much better governance than people in Malaysia deserve much better. But I think we cannot begin with the assumption that people in the countryside do not care, or people, they may be less well informed, but with the abundance of fake news as well, are we really all that better, much more informed? Why is it that for months and months and months, people were only paying attention to one MDB and nobody was paying attention to all the other abuses which are going on? This is part of the problem which we have. Our culture tends to get fixated on a few things, and this is part of the problem. And I think one point which Shah made, which is very, very important, we are going to have an election probably within 4 months, okay? Within the next 4 months, probably possibly even less than that. And look at how much interest there is tonight. But if you go to a Felda scheme and Tun Mahathir is going to speak there, you can be sure there'll be at least 5,000 people there, if not more. So who is more interested? Is it the rural people, or is it us who think we know? I don't mean to personalize it, but I think we shouldn't assume that rural people don't know and that we, the urban people, know. Okay? But their options are different. That's true. And the last point I'd like to make is that yesterday there was all this publicity about how much we have achieved as a nation. Okay? Now that's the ultimate in fake news, right? Right? No, I mean seriously. How many foreign workers do you think there are in Malaysia? Okay? If you look at the official numbers, depending on which ministry you look at, it's either 1 million or 2 million. Okay? Now, last year, the minister himself said that there are at least 6.7 million. Now, what is the official size of the official size of the Malaysian labor force? 14 million. So if you take 2 million out as foreign workers, 6.7 and you compare with the 12 million Malaysians, what do you get? In other words, almost 40% of the labor force is foreign. And they're not even considered in the official statistics. So we can say inequality has gone down or remain more or less stagnant because we don't care about foreign workers. We don't care about this underclass, and we are all quite smug in being one step ahead of these foreign workers. So we have this these are some of the problems which we face in thinking about some of these issues, so we have these numbers where, from your basic arithmetic, your denominator is much smaller because you pretend 5 million foreign workers are not in the country. So you can reach developed country status. And notice the exchange rate. The exchange rate is not the current exchange rate. Yeah? It's not the exchange rate which prevailed 3 months ago, which was about almost 4.5 ringgit to the US dollar. The exchange rate was conveniently the exchange rate of 2012, okay, when it was about 3.2 or 3.1, okay? So you can, so fake news is being generated on a regular basis, but nobody will, not that you don't want to try, but nobody is able to tell the emperor has got no clothes. Thank you.
Just to add to that, first of all, I think we must realize this one thing. With smartphones, with WhatsApp, information is being filtered all over the country. Do not make the mistake to think that so-called rural folks do not have access. They might be, before this, they only have access to, Bulletin Utama and so on and so forth. But now you have the internet. It's so easy to have internet connection. So they know. Their priorities might not be the same. You might think that we might think that one MDB is the most important thing, but to them, it's other things. bread and butter issues, and so on and so forth. And they are actually affected by these bread and butter issues. And this is the thing. The rural ground, the so-called Malay ground, is shifting. It is ready to shift. But the problem is, shift to where? Our opposition has not presented itself as a viable alternative government. Okay? So they are ready to shift, but there is no viable alternative to shift to. So this is the problem. We might feel apathy and all that, but the people outside of the Klang Valley, like Professor said, there are people who come whenever Tun Mahathir speaks and all that. But at the end of the day, if at the end of the day when it comes for you to cast your vote and you look at one a party which has been in power, yes, this is a party which has made the food prices go up and the prices of food go up. But at the end of the day, at least you know that this is a party that has been in power and they know what to do, as opposed to another coalition or group of parties which can't even present a prime minister candidate. At the end of the day, this is what matters. So you want to talk about them not being informed? They are informed, okay? But at the end of the day, how much will that shift be? Where will that shift be? I think it's still up something which is to be looked at.
Thank you, Shah. Any other questions?
Hello, I'm Rainer. I know the topic is about electoral reforms before G14, but my question is actually about more towards after the G14 part, maybe something that can be planned from now. So during the G13, after the G13, many election petitions were filed both by the governing parties and the opposition. And I think the numbers are unprecedented for that time. And many of that were actually rejected by the election court on technical grounds. So for the next post-G14 election petition in the election court, so what are the preparation to have a better result from that? Okay, thank you.
Maria, would you like to respond to that?
You mean after during this coming election? But I guess that the election petition is really related to why it didn't go through is really based on very technical grounds. That's why most of the cases actually were lost in that sense. As to how we can actually better, it's really we have to look at the laws, one. Two is that the political parties also need to be much more prepared, especially when they are doing their polling agent and counting agent, the documentation, how they actually do it is very important, because those evidences have to be presented in court. Otherwise, your court case actually gets thrown out. And most of the time, I remember in Pahang, some of them didn't even collect back the Form 14. So that doesn't help in terms of the court case. But you see, by right, we shouldn't even have election petitions. Yeah, if the election is actually run in a transparent and free and fair manner, I don't think we need to have any election petition. But so that's why I feel that, you know, now is the time, before they actually announce the election, to really start demanding that they actually correct some of their mistakes, and to make sure that, you know, this election is going to be one where we can actually level the playing field for all candidates. It's not just for one party.
Any other questions? Please.
Okay, hello, my name is Ruben. I'm actually representing from Mahasiswa Keadilan. I got several questions to ask in terms of, let's say, the young voters, because now we are focusing on the electoral voters, which is, we have the list already in the electoral rolls. But I do help invoke in terms of registering new voters, opening up booths and so on. But what I faced through was actually youngsters who are just after 21, after 22, in a very young age, who don't want to vote, who don't want to register as a voter. It's who comes on top, they're still going to do the same thing, which is going to makan duit. That's first concept. My second question to Prof, in terms of Greater Kuala Lumpur, the project of Great Kuala Lumpur, which they say that is going to, especially you can see over in Bangsa areas where you see the pricing of the areas is getting high, very high. So how are these young generations in future, with the debts they're holding, PTPTN, the other loans are coming up, how are this particular generation will survive in the coming future? Okay, my third question is actually regarding on the government workers, the government employees. What happened is, I do face this kind of situations where they said these government employees are afraid to vote because of the ministers are able to detect whom are they voting for due to the serial numbers on the, what do you call it, on the ballot. That's what they said. I have not voted yet. I have not voted because I'm just 24. They said this is my first time I'm about to vote. So how is this government employees affected? I mean, what are the comments or the advices you can actually share with us? Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Maybe Maria, you can start with, how do you respond to people who decide not to vote? You know, they're aware of what's going on, but they just feel like there's no point in voting.
I guess the young people who express that, yeah. One is not registering. The other one is actually not wanting to vote. Yeah. We have a problem because when we actually started our campaign, Undi campaign, we actually faced this problem where the young people are not coming forward to actually register. But it's also related to their perception of what is going on in this country and apathy as well. So I guess it's a long process, yeah. The awareness has to be there, and we have to continue to encourage them to actually vote. That is most important. As to how to inspire young people, I feel that, you know, the young people have to inspire themselves. Yeah, it's not going to happen overnight, but they have to inspire themselves to question what do they want for this country. That's most important. Otherwise, I can understand why, you know, if they don't see any hope in this country, they may not come out to vote also. Yeah. So one way in which we are trying to increase the registration is actually asking EC to have automatic registration. But of course, that is also not happening with our election commission because they want much better control over the electoral roll.
Shah, maybe you could respond to the question, you know, on the fear that the civil servants have.
As far as I'm not a civil servant, as far as I know that, you know, you can, I mean, I've known civil servants who are hardcore supporters of opposition members, and I have not seen them being targeted or anything like that. So you can tell them that, you know, whatever it is, just cast your vote, you know. How are they going to track? How many civil servants are there out there? They're the biggest employers, right? How are they going to track what your vote is going to be? You know, do they really have that much time to do that? And can they even do that? I don't think they can do that, right, Maria? Well, if they really wanted to, they probably could lah. But really, there's so many civil servants out there. Just tell them, cast your vote. Nowadays it used to be the case that perhaps last time, being an opposition supporter is something which you don't want to tell people, right? But now I think it's so common these days. The last general elections, the majority of Malaysians actually did not vote for Barisan Nasional. So it's really, they're not even in the minority these days. So I would say that go and tell them that go ahead and cast your vote. Even if they wanted to track your vote, you are one of millions. So don't be afraid. I will also try and take the other questions as well, simply because I'm younger. I think the issues of young people are there, and I think it's related to the first question, the question about the Greater KL and all that. Really, if you think that you're seeing your future, you're seeing how difficult it is for you to, survive in KL and so on and so forth, PTPTN and so on and so forth, there is a way. I mean, it's not a guarantee that by changing the government, suddenly we have a high-income nation and all that. But what we do know is that if we don't do something, if we don't, change the government, it's going to be the same thing that people face. If young people think that, what I have right now, I mean, how can they actually make that conclusion that it's going to be the same when they have not tasted that other devil that you don't know, right? So I think just like any other mature democracy, you need to constantly have a change of government. That's where the government will actually try their best to ensure that they stay in power, they have people-friendly, this one, and all the issues that you have mentioned that young people face, perhaps they will then try and do something about it. Right now, yes, they are doing a lot of, I think Khairi's ministry has been quite proactive when it comes to youth issues, right? But at the end of the day, some of the things which they need to address goes beyond just under the KBS banner. It's beyond the sports. You're talking about the economy and so on and so forth, which perhaps require a more transparent government, a government which actually has certain principles and so on and so forth. I'm not an economist. So you need to tell them, to these young people, that look, if you don't do something, this is going to be what you face. If you're not happy with what you have right now, if you don't do something, it's going to be the same thing and so on and so forth. It's going to get harder and harder for you. Okay? Again, no guarantee that if you change a government that, suddenly magically everything will be okay. But at the very least, you kickstart the process of changing government. And then we can truly call ourselves a mature democracy. And then we will come to a practice where, you don't perform, out you go. Can change government every 5 years, 10 years, it's okay. Right?
Good evening. My name is Yet May, and I'm a voter from Kelana Jaya. The delineation exercise that the EC wanted to do recently, I would like to ask whether they're going to bulldoze through, because I am voting in the Seri Setia Kelana Jaya parliamentary seat, and I was told that my lock, stock, barrel whole area is going to go to PJS if they actually bulldoze it through. So are they going to implement it?
Of course, they are going to implement it. Otherwise, they wouldn't want to go through the exercise. But what Bersih is trying to do is to actually delay the whole process so that we hope that they actually don't get through, because through the court cases, we try to delay the whole delineation. But the very fact that they started this delineation and rushing through shows that EC is committed and wants it to come to happen. And also, when they were doing the peninsula, when Selangor actually put up the court case, they actually said that we can actually exclude Selangor and go on with the the delineation in other states. So definitely there is a commitment on the EC side to actually bulldoze this delineation. And through our history, whenever we have a delineation exercise, Barisan Nasional does get to win, yeah, in the election, and it's meant to help Barisan Nasional. That is a historical fact. But now it's because people understand delineation, understand gerrymandering and also malapportionment, and people are objecting. This is the first time ever in a delineation exercise that 800 over people put in their objections. Never happened before, yeah? So slowly we are getting there somehow. But let's see what happens to this delineation exercise. There should be a second inquiry, so you would need to, I don't know when is your inquiry, but if it falls under Selangor, it's freeze for the time being. Yeah? If it falls in the other states, maybe the second inquiry is going on.
I think Hello. In Selangor, it's actually state. So there's the first inquiry. What happens that the notice comes out first, and then you have the first inquiry. If there are objections, then they have to have a local inquiry. For all the states except for Selangor, the first inquiry has already gone through. Now they are actually at the second inquiry stage. They have put the second inquiry, and for the states, they are actually going on right now. But for Selangor, it still haven't gone through the first inquiry stage. Malacca, it is also state, but it is at the second inquiry stage at this particular point in time. So if you are, the question is whether they are bulldozing it through. Yes, they are. But there are certain states like Selangor and Malacca where they because of the court order they can't proceed. But I think it's just a matter of time. At the end of the day, whatever happens, at the end of the day, the delineation process will be completed. Do you think that it's going to be this year? Probably the whole process probably this year. They want to do it before the next general elections, of course. But we are trying to stop that through the court process.
Thank you for all the questions. We are running out of time, so we have to conclude this session. Before we end this discussion, maybe the panelists could share.
Excuse me, I have one more question. My name is Melvin. Is Malaysia ready for online voting system? Because for our younger generation, just pre-registration, just one click, then we can vote. It's much easier than we have no need to queue up so long, then all these hassles. Thank you.
To be honest, if we have a mature election commission, we're ready for anything. But presently, no. I don't think so. I wouldn't ever trust them for online voting, okay?
Thank you. All right, would have to conclude this session. So maybe last message from the panelists to the audience and also to all Malaysians out there.
Well, I really want everyone to come out to vote. Don't give up your vote, and encourage the young people to register, or even those who have not registered or voted, please ask them to vote. Because it's very important. One small step is important for this country.
I'm going to take a bit longer because I actually came here with certain recommendations that I want to make. These are things which can be done before the general elections take place. And I think it's quite important for this. We've seen what Bersih's memorandum and all that. but I just want to focus on two things. The first is with regards to a caretaker government. I think we need to start seriously talking about putting some sort of code of conduct or even legislation for caretaker government. Caretaker government is basically a government that is in between when parliament is dissolved and the next government takes office. We don't really have a problem all this while because of the fact that it's the same Barisan Nasional, but still at the same time we need to ensure that there must be some sort of legislation or code of conduct put in place in order to ensure that when the parliament is dissolved, the government should be a government that is just there for the bare minimum of action needed to make sure everything goes by. They cannot, for example, enter into new contracts. They cannot announce new projects. They cannot make new appointments and so on and so forth because they do not have the mandate. They are just there to steady the ship while elections are going on and so on and so forth. A lot of countries, they might not have legislation, but they do have a code of conduct. But I think in this country we need legislation because code of conduct, I think our politicians will not really follow it. So we need legislation. This is something that we can done quite easily, you know. We can certainly draft it and you know, Parliament can pass it. So that's one. Related to that is we need to ensure or put in place law, perhaps to amend the Election Offences Act, or perhaps even put in place when I talked about the law about caretaker government, we need to also ensure that government machinery will not be used for campaigning. We've seen this far too many times, you know, especially during PRK's by-elections and so on and so forth. But we have also seen it at the last Sarawak general elections, where you know government machinery is being used in order to gain votes. You know, it might not directly be bribing, but the fact that you're using government machinery in order to do this is something which we need to perhaps put into our election laws under the Election Offences Act. And also, the other related thing that we need to start to look at is a law to prohibit this announcement of new projects at a localized area. You know, this pork barreling sort of announcements, where you want to gain votes. Suddenly, you know, you say that, oh, we're going to have a new hospital there, and so on and so forth. You know, again, using government machinery in order to gain votes. And this is relating, you know, goes back to the whole idea that once Parliament is dissolved, you don't really have a mandate to make all these announcements on behalf of the government because it's supposed to be a caretaker government. So these are things which I think we can put in place if Parliament, if the government has the political will to do it. And I think if government says that they want to do it, I think civil society can certainly assist them in drafting these laws. And they shouldn't be afraid because they're going to win the next. What's the fear with all these reforms? Thank you.
Yes, let me just make two comments. I think you really, it is our responsibility, especially for Bersih, to try to ensure there are many reforms which we can propose in the longer term, but I think we must try to ensure that we do not have the best system of elections money can buy. And this is really what is at stake, because right now we have a situation where there's a lot of money, including foreign money, big foreign money coming into our political system. And we run the risk of selling the future of the country. Now, as you know, Tun Mahathir has focused largely on the question of some big contracts with some Chinese contractors and so on. But I think there's much more at stake, very much more at stake. I think you have to take seriously the contributions which have been made by certain so-called foreign well-wishers, giving hundreds of millions in US dollars, in other words, billions of ringgit to politicians. It's not because they love our politicians so much. You know, there's something behind it. And nobody is in a position to, point the finger exactly what it is. But you can be sure that there is money behind it. Why should some member of a certain royal family give, hundreds of millions of US dollars, billions of Malaysian ringgit to a politician in this country? Just think about it. Just think about it. Ask your friends, ask your relatives to think about it. What is at stake? What is going on? Why would anybody pay that kind of money? And I think that's the first thing you have to think about. The second point I'd like to make is that I think Shah made a point earlier, is that we have political leaders who, including opposition political leaders, who are short of being statesmen. We have a system where we have a system supposedly patterned after Westminster. Do you remember how many percent of the popular vote the Conservative Party of the United Kingdom won in the last election? 34%. With a 3 to 4% increase, they are going to have a 2/3 majority in the next parliament. This is what the current surveys predict. This is precisely what is going to happen in Malaysia. Even if you have more than 60% of the vote being against the Barisan Nasional. That's why I say the next election is not going to be won by the Barisan Nasional. It's going to be lost by the opposition. And it's all very well for us to point the finger at particular culprits, but in fact, a lot of this started quite some time ago. Who broke up the Pilihanraya? Who walked out of the Pilihanraya? Who walked out of one arrangement after another? So we have a situation which has been precipitated by politicians who have been trying to get narrow political gains for their own parties, forgetting the will of the Malaysian people, which is far greater than what their narrow political interests are. And so I think an independent, non-partisan organization such as BERSE should lead the conversation. There's no point being confrontational. Should lead the conversation to ensure that the next election becomes one of whether the people want a continuation of the status quo. Because I think the continuation of the status, if you can get away with a rip-off, which is 1 billion the last time, this time you can get away with a rip-off of 5 billion, it's not going to continue to be 5 billion forever. You can get away with larger and larger amounts. Is that what we want for the future of our country, for ourselves, our children, and so on? These are the stakes which are, this is what is at stake for us. And that's why I think it is very important for those of us who are not directly involved in partisan politics to raise the level, the heat, not just on the ruling coalition, which is doing everything it can to remain in power, but also on the opposition politicians who have not been able to rise beyond their narrow partisan and personal interests to provide the nation with an alternative. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. For us Malaysians, there are a lot of things that we have to think about. The stakes are very high. I think we have to do something to fix the rotten system, and we can always work with BERSE, with a lot of other NGOs working on reforms. And I would like to thank again our panelists for coming here today, for being with us, for sharing your ideas and insights, and also your thoughts on the topic, on reforms and what we Malaysians can do to change things in this country. A couple of announcements. There's a donation box in the back. We would appreciate your support because we need donations to run 3 activities. One is the electoral forum campaign, the electoral reform campaign. Secondly, the Pemantau election observation. And we also need your support for the current legal cases on delineation. Right now, we have 9 cases pending in court, and we need your support, to pay for the legal fees, to pay for disbursements, and so on and so forth. We would appreciate your contribution. And secondly, there's a letter in the back that you can sign. This letter is addressed to the EC to basically push them to implement the reforms that we have demanded. I would appreciate if you could sign the letters before you go home. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for your support. Do not feel frustrated. It's okay to be upset, but we have to proceed, with our aim. We have to achieve our goals, and I think together we can make change possible. Thank you so much. Good night.